What's up, basement dwellers? Welcome to another edition of Podern Nerd. On this week's episode, we'll be talking Loki Season 2, Episode 3, titled 1893. Directed by Kazra Faharini, definitely butchered that, with the story by Eric Martin, the teleplay by Eric Martin, Kazra, and Jason O'Leary, and hit the Disney Plus streaming platform on October 19th, 2023. Joining me as always for Loki Season 2, Cheever.
And that's a name you could always pronounce.
Exactly. It's like Farahani, I think is her last name. I got it right, not trying to, focusing on it better this time. But it's interesting because I think we talked about this last week. She is only one of 3 director teams in here.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of the episodes are directed by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. Everything is written by Eric Martin. So, anyway, in 1893, we finally find out where Ravonna Renslayer has been, as well as we get introduced to Mr. Victor Timely. First and foremost, what were your initial thoughts on 1893?
So 1893, it definitely gets us that storyline that we've been needing, right? This is the storyline that pushes the narrative of what the season can actually be, what the future of Marvel holds, right? Because right now everyone's kind of split all over the place and we don't know what's happening. And I'm a very firm believer that Loki has always been that driving force between the new Avengers movie that's coming out.
It's always funny that Loki seems to be the catalyst for sagas. He's the one who kind of tipped the hat to Thanos coming to Earth. Also the first villain of the first Avengers. And now he's really teeing up the Kang Wars. What's interesting about this episode is technically it starts in 1868 on the sacred timeline. And then we travel to the future, per se, to 1893 on a branch timeline. So He Who Remains apparently has this entire backup plan that when he dies, his predecessors can be supplanted throughout the timeline. So if you know anything about Kang, he's from the year 3000.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that they have a variant of Kang dropped into 1868 in Chicago, which is not a great time for, unfortunately, African Americans in American history. But he was teed up by dropping off the TVA timeline handbook, dropping it off to this variant so he would catch up and be able to, I guess, ultimately replace him. How do you feel that Kang, or Nathaniel Richards as we know him, has variants throughout the sacred timeline that can be supplanted or just left to not do anything? Well, how do you feel about the way they're doing this with the variants?
So you have to think back to the ending of season 1, where He Who Remains kind of always hints at the, right, this is supposed to be I don't know what happens next. Mm-hmm. He also kind of plays it as Loki, you are destined to take over to make sure everything stays in place. So having a backup plan makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, right, if there always needs to be a He Who Remains in place, then it was always He Who Remains wrote that Loki is supposed to make He Who Remains. Kind of closing the circle in a sense.
I think it's interesting that Victor Timely is a constant in the sacred timeline, and the branching moment is when you drop off the handbook to him. So the idea is that branch timeline, they'll be able to pick out the mature Victor Timely and use him as the new He Who Remains. But the sacred timeline Victor Timely probably is irrelevant to history, per se. So I thought that was interesting, which then makes that whole end scene at the end of Ant-Man make you wonder if they're all branched variants that Rama Tut would be what Ramatut is in real history, but something happened to make that branched version that's Kang.
Someone dropped off a handbook.
Yeah, or just like there's a key moment that now you have Kang the Conqueror version of Ramatut. Whereas if that interaction didn't happen, whatever it may be, Ramatut would just be Ramatut, and so on and so forth for all of them. I think it's interesting because you also now get more Miss Minutes in this episode. After her being MIA for the first two, you're getting not only her reemergence in the season, but more personality and more of the scary part of AI of what happens. Yeah. What did you think of Miss Minutes in this episode?
Miss Minutes definitely is a character all in herself. I think that the scene that probably sticks out to me and everyone else is when we're in Victor Timely's lab and she kind of starts seducing him. Like, that is the scary moment of, oh shit, this is someone that can go rogue. Like, this is someone that has their own agenda. Because in season 1, Miss Minutes is always kind of like that background character of, I'm here to help. So to have that inflection adds to her story and her character, her flavor.
Yeah. If you think about it, season 1, she's kind of like the paperclip that pops up when you open a Word document.
Yeah.
And in season 2, she's now borderline Ultron of like, I need a body.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Well, it's crazy and it's not crazy because you kind of had a feeling that Ms. Minutes was in on the whole TVA creation thing. I thought it was interesting that she reverted herself to like an old-timey cartoon version. And even then she was still too futuristic. Like she used qualities of like 1920s cartoons.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting she teamed up with Renslayer because Renslayer was another character that was MIA, and we just at the end of episode 2 you got the hint that she was on this branch timeline, which then draws Loki and Mobius to not Morbius. That'd be a completely different show. Down to that timeline to get Victor Timely. So how do you feel about Renslayer's reintroduction and her kind of guided path of like, we're going to rebuild the TVA and she thinks she's going to be a partner? Granted, there's probably more to it, but at this point, what we're thinking is she knows shit hit the fan and this is her way to restore the order and rebuild.
I don't even think necessarily that this is what we need to rebuild. I think she's under the impression that this is what was destined for me from He Who Remains. And if I do this, I get my seat at the table, right? I will no longer be just the time hunter, but I will have my rightful spot as like a war general in a sense.
Yes.
So so definitely that thought process. She doesn't know what's going on. It's clear that all she knows is that this is the man at the end of time wants me to do this, which is very early on with Miss Minutes. She goes, "Don't you want to make the man at the end of time happy? Like, if you want to see him, you should drop this book through the window."
And there's definitely a loyalty there from her side of it that is more pronounced than any of the other TVA members. Like most of them are just kind of like, no, this is just the job. This is what we have to do. She has like an added layer of loyalty without knowing why she has an added layer.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It does.
So we're finally introduced to Mr. Jonathan Majors' version of Victor Timely.
Love that man.
So the interesting thing, sorry about that. The interesting thing is you see He Who Remains is a little bit quirky, but is, I would say, charismatic and basically well put together. Victor Timely is kind of the opposite. He's still quirky, but he stutters a lot. There's confidence there, but I wouldn't say as strong as He Who Remains. And the big thing is he's a scam artist. How do you feel of this variant of Kang?
I would say he's more of a social outcast, looking for a way to make his way in the world.
Mhm.
And once that TVA book drops, he kind of goes, I can make something that people will want to buy.
Yeah,
And
and
so
he's kind of limited by the era's technology.
exactly. And so for him, I feel that for him it's more of a misguided soul.
Mhm.
So yeah.
I thought it was interesting. So all this takes place at the Chicago World's Fair in the branch timeline, and he's kind of a third alternative to Edison and Tesla, as trying to be like the name of the game, and when it comes to the energy business, which is
Yeah.
oddly reminiscent of Tony's rebirth after he gets out of arms ammunition and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But clearly, he's demonstrating what would eventually be known as the loom, but an 1893 version of it, given that he can't have all the resources.
Mhm.
And then cons in a baron to kind of pay money for it, and then gets in some kind of like, a nice little 1893 chase to the first ever Ferris wheel. And then runs into basically Renslayer, Loki, Mobius, all trying to convince him, like, hey, we need your help, without Renslayer being on the same side as Loki and Mobius. How
Yeah.
did you feel about like the interaction between Loki, Mobius, and Renslayer? I expected it to be more contentious, and I feel like it wasn't.
There was definitely tension in the air,
Mhm.
and I felt like there should have been more of a fight for that
Mhm.
first introduction.
It was very casual, right? Like it
Yeah.
just felt like, okay, we're gonna battle with wit instead of like,
Yeah.
hey, fuck you, buddy.
Well, they also met in a group setting.
Mhm.
Oh, you can't really go all out because
Yeah,
if something major happens, then the reality splits even further.
yeah, because like that's a good point. They're at a public Chicago World's Fair, so they're not going to try to make a scene. Although Loki does use his magic twice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So ultimately, they chase Timely all the way to the Ferris wheel, and Loki gets him cornered, and kind of starts explaining things. But then we get a reemergence of Sylvie, and Sylvie has came back to this branch timeline because she her one of her last lines in the second episode is, whenever he shows up, I'll just kill that version too.
Yeah.
And that's why she's there. Which again, it's kind of reminiscent of the end of season 1, where Loki's trying to stop Sylvie.
Yeah.
And Victor has no clue what the hell's going on.
Yeah. Like, let me interject for a second.
Sure.
So, because after that interaction, do you think they're going to set the big bad to be Sylvie?
It's a good question, because I think with at least the Loki story arc in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, he becomes the unintentional villain,
Mhm.
where he sets off a chain of events that eventually led to Thanos after being the quote unquote villain. And I think Sylvie had the quote unquote villain tag up through halfway through season 1.
Yeah.
So I think she's turned into more of an unintentional villain.
Okay.
Because killing He Who Remains obviously unleashed all the timelines, which is fantastic. It was very noble, and that's kind of like the good cause to get behind in season 2.
Yeah.
But it has the consequences for every branch timeline you allow to survive. There's a branch version of Kang, which is equally as bad as the billions of trillions of lives you save on that branch timeline. So she's kind of an unintentional villain in that aspect. I don't think she'll be it's weird because you don't really have an overall, like Victor right now. If you were to ask me, Victor is the overall villain, just because he's supposed to be the replacement of He Who Remains. If we're going to stick with the logic of He Who Remains as the villain.
Yeah.
But I think Sylvie, based on her actions of why she showed up in 1893, she's just always going to be unintentional. Because me, if just real quick, if they had a contingency plan to turn Victor into a variant of Kang, if something happened to Victor, there must be there's a plan C.
Yeah.
So she's just basically moving on to the next problem. But go on.
Yeah. So then my question is, so if Sylvie is not the big bad, do you think the big ultimatum at the end of the series will be kill Sylvie or let Kang the Conqueror or all the variants of Kang the Conqueror come to fruition.
I think Kang is inevitable to steal a Thanos line.
Yeah.
I don't think Sylvie will die. What I think is happening will happen by the end of this season. I doubt they go to a season 3. It's basically they're setting up the chaos that they have to assemble an Avengers type defense, where like Loki's trying to do this all on his own, or Loki's trying to do it with the team he has, but then it gets to a point of like, okay, we can't do it with just us. I think that's where they're going.
Yeah, when you get Thor, when you get Hawkeye, I'm not sure what his contract is, Jeremy Renner's contract, but yeah,
he's got a lot of medical bills. He's gonna have to pay all that shit off.
Yeah.
The one other thing that, and we touched base on it in episode 2, and I'm still holding out that it'll be a cameo. This is the director and the writer. I think it's the writer did an interview and said that Loki and Thor have been apart for far too long. I think it's about time to reunite them. So I think that as we talk about this coming back to an Avengers level threat, this season might end with Loki actually seeing Thor. And I think we talked about a little bit last episode that there's going to be that reuniting at some point. I think it'll be at the end of this season, either of a post-credit or maybe the last scene. I think you had made reference to it possibly being in Captain Marvel too.
Yeah, definitely. So then my last question, especially with Sylvie getting more involved in this season, is do you see Sylvie continuing on in the MC universe?
Yeah, so like Sylvie's kind of a hard character for me to reconcile in my brain for the MCU, just because every time you see a variant, they're still named the same. Like it was always Loki. The other ones they met in the wherever they get thrown to. Yeah. They just went, oh, that's old Loki, kid Loki. They were basically just putting an adjective in front of them based on whatever they looked like. Sylvie, I do think sticks around. I think she will be the MCU's version of the Enchantress. So it's because I think they missed their opportunity to the Enchantress, which makes sense because you would have overloaded the Thor movies with characters. Yeah. Because you did get the Executioner in Carl Urban's character.
Yep.
But you didn't get the Enchantress, which is those two are just commonly like Loki's henchmen when he carries out villain stuff. But because they're doing a hero arc with Loki, I think Sylvie would be a good way to implant the Enchantress without calling her the Enchantress.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, yeah, I think she's sticking around, but I don't think she'll be considered Loki. I use air quotes that you can't see on a podcast.
Okay. I mean, that's all. That sedates my questions about Sylvie for now.
That's fair. So these two basically duke it out inside the overlarged Ferris wheel cart, which again I think is an interesting hat tip to history by using the Chicago's World Fair because that is the first Ferris wheel. They use magic, which ultimately blasts Victor and Loki out of the car unit. Mm-hmm. And then Victor takes off with Renslayer and Miss Minutes after using Miss Minutes to Ghostbusters people by scaring. I also think the interesting thing with Miss Minutes is she's AI, but she can she has occasionally affected her surroundings. She tore down some banners and she was stepping on some stuff. It's like, oh, so you could inflict damage.
Yeah.
Which was interesting. So those guys take off. And then we have interaction between those three, and you get this awkward love triangle. How do you feel about that?
I think it was a little over the top.
Mm-hmm.
Giving Miss Minutes the love angle, I don't know. It feels cheap in my eyes.
Well, I think it's... So Miss Minutes obviously has the big picture of over everything. She knows what the start was. She knows where and everything in between, and she keeps that log. So I can see where she would develop an affection for Victor Timely. just based on her interactions with He Who Remains.
It's not only just Victor Timely, it was basically Victor Timely's assistant.
Yeah.
She said she goes from like a chess playing AI to tracking everything and being basically in charge of the TVA as an administrator. Like that's a connection of trust and devotion that just builds.
Yeah. So I think the awkward part for this love triangle for me is the Ravonna and Victor part of it. Victor doesn't know anything about anything. He just knows 1868 to 1893. Yeah. Ravonna knows about the TVA, knows like the script that you're given to a TVA agent, and knows that there is a person at the end of time that was handling all this, and that's who she's devoted to. So for them to have like this weird love triangle with Victor, it's kind of weird. Miss Minutes I get, because she dealt with his variant and knows what his purpose is. Ravonna doesn't really know too much of the plan. She does parts of it, and Victor doesn't know shit. So when Victor says he doesn't work with partners and he cuts her loose, makes sense. That it was also funny that he chose to side with the AI over a human. And you can actually see that tonal shift on that boat they're in when Miss Minutes moves from like the background and moves over to Victor. Of like, okay, we're now the team.
Yeah.
But then you brought it up earlier. She eventually, when she gets Victor alone, kind of goes psycho. Of like, hey, your variant promised me a body, promised me to like, we're gonna do this together, and basically use the whole partner idea again.
Yeah.
Where Victor shuts it down. Why do you think he's so headstrong to not have a partner?
I think deep down inside, all the Kang and Kang variants have like this rooted distrust of people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if I trust my variant, then therefore it's gonna cause that intergalactic war, interuniversal war, right? So I think every Kang just has to go like, no, no, just by myself. Because if every Kang had a partner at some point, it takes away from Kang the Conqueror, right? Because that's Kang the Conqueror and ex-assistant or ex-partner. You can also kind of say that with what's his face? The guy that was from Guardians of the Galaxy. What's his face?
The high power. No, what the fuck's his name?
No, the blue guy.
Oh, Yondu?
No, not Yondu. The other blue guy.
Ronan.
Yes. Wasn't Ronan part of Kang the Conqueror's story arc or no?
He's part of. He might have been. He's always kind of like an A-level henchman, where he's usually working for someone, but could be a threat on his own. So it's either he's with the Kree Empire. The MCU used him as a Thanos puppet until he turned on Thanos and made him the Guardians' big baddie. But yeah, I would say, I mean, Thanos, if you think about it too, he kind of works alone. He has henchmen and what he would consider followers, but I guarantee you he doesn't see them on the same level.
Exactly. Well, they're his disciples.
Yeah, and then if you go into the comic aspect of Thanos too, he has always been a loner. He, like you said, he has the disciples that'll go out and handle his work, but those disciples are easily replaced. Kind of like Apocalypse too on the X-Men side of it. His four horsemen are constantly rotated.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting because Victor has basically taken a stance of like, hey, all these weird people from quote unquote the future or just like from a different time period are trying to I have mentioned that I'm a very important person that needs to do things, and he shuts them all out. Because he as Miss Minutes is going on the rant, he basically powers down the AI, which would then allow Loki and Mobius to show up to make their pitch as to why to go. And he seems to side with them, which makes you think that like, okay, this Victor Timely isn't fully corrupt. That I granted he played all his cards with the other two, but ultimately he does side with the Loki and Mobius characters, even after Sylvie kind of like put him on the ropes.
Yeah.
How did you feel about the speech that Victor gives to Sylvie about?
Oh, I've done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
That was a beautiful wordplay. The writers, I love that. That's a key example of showing and not telling.
Yes. Do you think it was sincere?
I think it was sincere. And the part of all of that, right, it throws back to season 1 of why Sylvie went on the run. Right? Sylvie went on the run because she's a variant. And here Sylvie is having someone grovel at her feet saying, I'm not who you think I am. I am not the man that's going to do the things you say I'm going to do.
Yeah. Like, I haven't done it yet. I still have the ability for that quote unquote free will.
Exactly. And that's what Sylvie just wants. She wants that free will to be there in the universe. And she has to reconcile her own logic and argument, which is, hey, if I kill him, I'm just as bad as the people that did me wrong from season 1.
Mm-hmm. And that's, I think it's a reoccurring Marvel theme. Anytime they talk about time travel, I know it's not technically part of the MCU yet. Deadpool 2 did it with the whole time slip devices where they went back, like the scene that didn't actually make it in there, but he went and corrected the past with Hitler's baby and stuff like that. And then even Avengers Endgame kind of went through a bunch of scenarios of like, hey, why don't we just go back and find baby Thanos and
kill him?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting, especially like he hits the note of free will, which, like you said, that's Sylvie's motivator. Everything Sylvie's done since we met her is because hers was robbed from her. So Victor goes with Mobius and Loki, and they're done for this episode.
Yeah,
you're left with Renslayer and Sylvie basically kind of wanting retribution, but rather than killing her,
which would have solved so much more.
And the fucking show at that point.
Yeah,
she kicks her into an opening, which takes her to the end of time, where you see a rotting corpse of He Who Remains. So quite some time has passed in that area. And Renslayer. So before we move on to that, how do you feel about Sylvie not just killing her or pruning her per se?
I think it's sweet justice in a sense. Right? You want to see the guy at the end, like, right? That's how the episode starts. You want to see the guy at the end of time, you have to do all of this. And even though she fails at what she does, she still ends up to see the man at the end of the time decomposing. So she got what she wanted. It's like it's a monkey's paw. You got what you wanted, but it's not exactly what you wanted.
Yeah, and I think you're right. To keep Sylvie from being like a more villain in the anti-hero of her character arc, it makes sense for her to just kind of strand her there, even though Renslayer has the Miss Minutes time pad. Because we see when she gets there, she brings out Miss Minutes, who's still speaking, by the way. Like, she didn't finish her thought with Victor. She just kind of goes, shit.
Which is, I love you.
Yeah. And then this bitch basically drops the bomb of, there's a secret about you that you're just going to really piss you off.
Yeah.
And it ends the episode there. Which then makes you think that, again, Miss Minutes is stringing this whole thing together. She knows the beginning, the middle, and where they're at now.
Yeah.
How did you like the end of the episode?
It definitely keeps you hooked, which is something I can say that this show and series does far better than any of the other MCU shows.
It is definitely a leader when it comes to the Disney Plus shows that have happened.
Yeah.
I don't per se hate any Disney Plus show except for WandaVision. And I've made my thoughts there. Basically, I hated WandaVision for its lack of focus in writing, not the characters themselves.
Yeah.
I think all the series, we had expectations to move a phase forward, and they did character studies instead, which is fine. But like, when you announce yourself as a cinematic universe, you should have more intertwining arcs.
And it also wasn't what they hyped it to be.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah,
hyped
exactly.
it as this is going to continue the MCU. This will all be important. It's all going to connect. And then we have yet to have a real payoff for WandaVision.
Yeah, and I think it's probably why we also, just us as fans, steered away from not doing podcasts after a couple of them. Because like we tried to do podcasts with Podern Nerd after each episode. It was rough. Like you're given an arc like Secret Invasion, and you're expecting at least to get some more Avengers, and all you get is War Machine. Nothing against War Machine, but like War Machine and Everett Ross being the two, we'll say, Avenger level heroes in that, being Skrulls, is kind of a letdown.
Yeah.
But I to your point where this is just bringing you back week in and week out, that's huge. Because I would say with the other ones, yeah, I would watch it the day it released, but it was not immediate. This is like 9:01. I'm refreshing.
Yeah. I want to see what happens. I need to know what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like I like, again, Winter Soldier, Falcon Winter Soldier. I have yet to see it. Like I haven't heard enough to make me drive to want to see it. What was the other shows that were out there? And it's just like,
I think you're gonna have to at least watch that before Captain America 4. Because there's going to be backstory for Sam in that obviously leads to why he's Captain America now. I think the same with She-Hulk. You probably would want to at least brush up on before the Daredevil series comes out.
Yeah.
And if Hulk appears in anything, because he has a little bit of a story arc in it. But to your point, it's not like these are phase movers. Loki is. Loki ended with a cliffhanger at season 1, and almost we're 3 episodes in, and each episode is essentially a cliffhanger of like, oh shit is hitting the fan at the end of every episode.
Yeah.
And we still have no resolution, but it's also moving everything forward because this is at least happening in the background as all those individual stories are being laid out.
Exactly. And like you said, like She-Hulk, you don't necessarily need to watch She-Hulk to know that She-Hulk ends up dating Matt Murdock.
Yeah.
That you can fix that with one dialogue sentence in the first episode. Oh, by the way, I'm dating what's her face, who happens to be She-Hulk.
The only thing I think you would, not even, because it was in the last 5 seconds where they showed that Hulk had a kid.
Yeah.
If they go a Young Avengers route, then yeah, you're going to need to go back and watch a lot of these series, and then watch the Black Widow movie and watch Hawkeye.
But again, those clips are like, it's a minute at the end of the show.
You're not wrong.
Like, I mean, you could watch all of She-Hulk. You can exclude all of She-Hulk, but then get to the post-credit scene of, oh, by the way, I have a kid, and all of the fight that you had, the fake lawyer drama, just goes to the wayside because you don't need to know, except for Wang. You gotta know about Wang.
Wong.
Wong, thank you.
And the fact that he has a girlfriend that calls her Wongers, who I hope shows back up in something else.
I hope she's a staple.
The thing that I think annoys a lot of people is Phase 4 is kind of a carbon copy of Phase 1, but with lesser characters. And in Phase 1, you were stoked. You were getting the Thor origin, the Iron Man origin, the Cap origin, Guardians origin. Phase 4, you're wrapping up Guardians, Ant-Man, the characters you've been fond of, and then you're being introduced to new characters so they can continue the story, but we're impatient. You got the big bang with the Thanos and the Endgame and Infinity War, and now you're like, well, no, I want Kang Dynasty tomorrow. So it's tough to get through She-Hulk, the Eternals, basically where they're establishing new stories for the next generation of heroes. This show is probably the truest continuation of Endgame. Of like, okay, you still want to keep going 60 miles per hour. We'll keep you on that pace. Where everything else is like, all right, hit the brakes and let's slow down a bit before we get there. And that's why I think when this ends, this season 2, everybody else is going to be forced to speed up to catch up.
Well, the idea that just split it into my brain is when it comes to all the other shows and it comes to Loki, Tom Hiddleston is a by far like well-known superior actor.
Mm-hmm.
Do you really have that talent pool with the other shows? Like Secret Invasion, you have Samuel L. Jackson, but that for the most part is it.
Which is weird because I just went through that whole spiel about setting up the future, and Secret Invasion is probably the only one who said, "Nope, the future isn't going to be here. Let me kill the future by shooting fucking killing Maria Hill, like killing, not even like the fake killing." And then basically saying, and then basically saying, well, War Machine and Everett Ross, they've been Skrulls. We don't know how long. We can kind of guesstimate how long they've been Skrulls, but like basically they're resetting them back. At least Rhodey is potentially reset back to Civil War because he's in a hospital gown. So the worst case scenario, that's from the injury before Thanos and all that bullshit happened.
Yeah.
Best case is he got hurt somewhere after Endgame, and we're not going to retcon all the shit he did in between, like him crying that Tony's dead.
Yeah.
So
we'll just assume that he cried anyway.
Yeah, like I gotta act this way out of this one. But I do like Loki for the fact that here we are mid season 2. They're punching forward full throttle. And it does look like I have more confidence in Kang as a threat than I did at the end of Ant-Man. And we're not even done Loki.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I think that's going to kind of conclude our episode 3 recap. We're halfway through the season. Episode 4 is next week. What are you looking forward to in episode 4?
Well, I would like to see where the path goes for Miss Minutes.
Yeah,
and Renslayer. Yeah, like you end on a cliffhanger like that. That's exactly where the direction the next episode's going to go, and I have a feeling it's just going to be action packed.
I'm very interested in what happens once Victor sets foot in the TVA. Is it going to be like you know how like in Civil War they had those code words for Bucky, and Bucky would just turn into is that going to happen with Victor? That he gets to the TVA, he's been reading up on the TVA, now he knows how to take over the TVA. Like, is it going to be that turn, or is he legitimately going to help them? So I'm very interested in that story, as well as Miss Minutes, because Miss Minutes is clearly the puppeteer right now when it comes to everything. But that's going to do it for us here on Podern Nerd.
Woo!
I've been Chris the Dace Man. Dace, he's been Cheever.
Yeah.
Still don't have an outro. Nobody's told me an outro. I guess I'll just do the Basement Protocol outro. Thank you for tuning in, all my basement dwellers, and remember, stick to the protocol. See you next time.
That's a new outro.